I never thought the hands I taught to throw a baseball would be the ones that left me bleeding on my kitchen floor. But that is exactly what happened. And I want to tell you about it. Not because I need sympathy, not anymore, but because I think some of you already know this kind of pain. The kind that doesn't come from a stranger. The kind that comes from someone who called you dad. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 63 years old. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, and I spent 40 years working construction, framing houses in the summer heat, pouring concrete in February when the temperature dropped to -20, wearing through 2 pairs of work boots every year until my knees ached so badly my doctor told me I was walking on bone. I did all of that for one reason. My son. His mother, my wife Diane, passed away from ovarian cancer when our son was 11 years old. I remember sitting in the hospital parking lot after she was gone, just sitting there in my truck for 2 hours, unable to start the engine. When I finally got home, my son was sitting on the front step in his winter coat, waiting for me. He looked at my face and he already knew. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around my waist and we stood there in the cold together. I told myself that night that everything I did from that point forward would be for him. I would not fall apart. I would not disappear into grief. I would be both parents, somehow, even knowing I could never be his mother. I was not a perfect father. I missed school concerts because of overtime. I burned dinner more nights than I can count. There were years when the money was so tight I bought his winter jacket from Value Village and prayed he wouldn't notice. He noticed. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. I know because years later, when things were better, he told me he used to tell his friends the jacket was vintage. He was trying to protect me, even then. Or so I believed. I worked double shifts through his high school years to save. Not just to get by, to actually save. Every dollar I didn't spend went into a separate account I opened at the TD branch on King Street. By the time my son was in his mid-20s and I had taken an early retirement package from the company I'd been with for 22 years, I had a little over $200,000 saved. That was my retirement, my security, the thing standing between me and having to choose between groceries and medication in my 70s. My son knew the broad strokes. He knew I had savings. What he didn't know was the exact amount, and that detail mattered more than I realized at the time. He had been with his girlfriend for about 3 years when he brought her home for Christmas. Her name was Tanya. She was from a well-off family in Oakville. Her father owned a landscaping company with about 60 employees. Her mother did something in real estate development. They were not bad people, exactly. But they had a way of making you feel like everything around you was slightly insufficient. The wine wasn't quite right. The neighborhood was cozy. My kitchen was very lived in. Small things. The kind of things you notice but can't quite call out without sounding paranoid. My son had changed since he started spending more time with her family. Not overnight, gradually, the way a plant bends slowly toward light. He started wearing different clothes, talking about different things. He used to call me every Sunday. Then it became every other Sunday. Then less. I told myself it was natural. He was building his own life. That was what I'd raised him to do. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Saturday afternoon in March. My son came over alone, which was unusual by then since Tanya was almost always with him. He seemed nervous. He sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten 10,000 dinners together, and he told me that he and Tanya were getting engaged and that they wanted to have the wedding in Banff, at a resort. I told him congratulations. I meant it. I stood up and hugged him, and I meant every bit of it. I asked him when he was thinking, asked if I could meet her parents properly before the engagement was announced, asked whether he was happy. He said yes to all of it. He was smiling. It felt like the old version of him, the one who used to sit at that table and tell me about his day. Then he said, "Dad, we're going to need some help with the costs." I asked what kind of help he had in mind. He said Tanya's family was contributing $40,000 and they were expecting my contribution to match. I set down my coffee mug. I want you to understand the feeling in that room. It wasn't anger, Not yet. It was more like the sensation of standing on ice and hearing it crack under you, that split second before you understand what is happening. I said, $40,000? He said yes. He said a Banff wedding for 120 guests had a certain baseline cost, and that Tanya had already spoken to venues, and that 40,000 was actually the conservative estimate of what my share would be. I told him I didn't have that kind of money to give away. He looked at me differently then. Something shifted in his face. He said, "Dad, I know about your savings." I asked him what he knew. He said he'd spoken to someone. He didn't say who, not at first, who had told him I had significantly more than I'd ever let on. He said he felt like I'd been hiding money from him his whole life while he struggled. I want to pause here because I need you to understand. My son had a good job in IT project management. He made over $90,000 a year. He was not struggling. He had never struggled, not as an adult. The struggling had been mine, alone, in the years when he was young and didn't know what it cost to keep the lights on. I asked him again where he got his information. He admitted finally that Tanya's cousin worked at a different branch of my bank. I won't name the bank again because it doesn't matter. What matters is that this cousin had, somehow, accessed information about my account and shared it with Tanya, who had shared it with my son. They knew the rough figure, not exact, but close enough. I told my son that what that person did was illegal, that accessing a customer's financial records without authorization was a fireable offense and potentially a criminal matter. I told him I was not going to give $40,000 to fund a destination wedding I hadn't been consulted about. I told him that if he and Tanya wanted a wedding, I would happily contribute something reasonable. I said $10,000, which was already a significant gift, but that I would not be emptying my retirement savings because his fiancé's family expected it. He stood up from the table. What happened next? I have gone over it in my mind so many times, trying to find the moment where I could have changed the outcome, where I could have said something different. I don't think there was anything. I think what happened had been building for a long time, fed by people who had been whispering things into his ear that I could not hear. He told me I was selfish. He said I had always been selfish, that I had used his mother's death as an excuse to work instead of being present, that I cared more about money than I ever cared about him. Those words hit me somewhere that I can't fully describe. I had sold Diane's engagement ring, a small diamond in a simple gold setting that she had worn every day of our marriage, to pay for his hockey equipment when he was 14 because we didn't have the money. I had sold her ring. And here he was telling me I never cared. I told him to stop. He didn't stop. I don't remember exactly what I said next. I remember raising my voice. I remember telling him that he had no idea what I had given up, no idea what his childhood had actually cost me, no idea how many nights I had eaten crackers and peanut butter so that he could have a hot meal. And then I said something I probably shouldn't have said, though I stand by the feeling behind it. I told him that Tanya's family's money wasn't going to buy him a different father. He hit me. One punch, directly to the left side of my face. I went down. My hip hit the edge of the counter on the way down, and I landed hard on the kitchen floor. I remember the linoleum felt cold. I remember thinking, in a very strange, detached way, that I needed to get up. I tried to, and my vision went sideways. He stood over me for a moment. I will never forget the look on his face, something I didn't recognize, something that didn't look like my son. And then he walked out of my house. I lay on that floor for a few minutes before I could get up. I called my neighbor, a retired nurse named Frances, who had looked in on me occasionally since I'd been living alone. She came over within 10 minutes, took one look at me, and drove me to the hospital herself. I had a concussion. My hip was badly bruised, not broken, though it felt broken for weeks. The ER doctor asked me how it happened. I told her. She asked if I wanted to file a police report. I said I needed to think about it. Here is something no one tells you about being assaulted by your own child. The instinct to protect them doesn't disappear just because they hurt you. It takes time to work through that. I lay in that hospital bed and I cried, not because of my hip or my head, but because somewhere in the back of my mind I kept thinking about that little boy sitting on the front step in his winter coat, waiting for me to come home. Frances stayed with me. She didn't say much. She is not a person who fills silence with noise, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about her. At some point she said quietly, "You have to report it, Lorne." That was the first time I had heard someone say it plainly, without any of the softening. "You have to report it." I did. I called the Hamilton Police Service the following morning. An officer came to my home, took my statement, and photographed my injuries. My son was contacted. He denied hitting me. He said I had fallen, that I was confused, that the concussion had affected my memory. What he didn't know was that I had installed a security camera in my kitchen 8 months earlier, after a break-in 2 doors down on my street. The camera was a small thing, mounted near the top of my cabinet facing the kitchen table. It recorded everything. I had not thought about it once during the confrontation. I hadn't remembered it was there, but it was there, and it had recorded everything, the whole conversation. His face when he stood over me, all of it. When I told the officer about the camera, everything changed. The footage was retrieved. My son was charged with assault causing bodily harm. There was also, separately, an investigation opened into how Tanya's cousin had accessed my financial records. That is a violation under federal privacy legislation in Canada, and the bank took it extremely seriously. The cousin was terminated and is facing potential charges under the Federal Privacy Act. My son hired a lawyer. The lawyer tried various approaches, suggesting the footage was ambiguous, suggesting I had provoked him, suggesting that family disputes were complicated and that the courts shouldn't involve themselves. The judge did not agree. My son pleaded guilty, eventually, in exchange for a reduced sentence, a conditional discharge with 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and a no-contact order that meant he could not come within 500 meters of my home or contact me by any means. I sat in that courtroom and I watched him stand before the judge, and I felt. Nothing is simple about what I felt. Grief, mostly. Not satisfaction. Not the relief I had expected, just grief. The same kind I had felt in that hospital parking lot 23 years earlier, sitting in my truck unable to start the engine. The feeling of a door closing on something you cannot get back. Tanya ended the engagement 3 weeks after the guilty plea. I heard this through a mutual acquaintance, not from my son. I don't know what he is doing now. I don't know where he's living. The no-contact order works both ways, and I have respected it completely. In the months after the trial, I did some hard thinking about what I wanted my life to look like. I had $200,000 in savings. I had my health, more or less. I had Frances next door, and a few good friends from my construction days, and a routine that kept me steady. I was not falling apart, but I was also not living. I was just moving through days. A friend of mine who volunteers with a seniors advocacy organization in the city told me about a program that provides emergency legal aid to elderly Canadians who have been financially exploited by family members. Elder financial abuse, they call it. It is more common than most people realize. Adult children pressuring aging parents to sign over assets. Caregivers manipulating people who are isolated. Family members helping themselves to accounts belonging to people who can no longer easily monitor their own finances. I made a donation, a significant one. I won't say the exact amount because it's not about the number, it's about the fact that I chose to take something that came from 40 years of pouring concrete in February and frame houses in the July heat and use it to protect people who are in the position I almost ended up in. People who didn't have a security camera. People who didn't have a Francis next door. People who said yes because they were afraid, or alone, or because they loved someone who was hurting them. My son has not tried to contact me since the no-contact order was put in place. I don't know if he thinks about that afternoon in my kitchen. I don't know if he thinks about his mother's ring, or the Value Village jacket, or the 10,000 Sunday mornings I got up and made him breakfast, even when I was running on 4 hours of sleep. I think about him. I think about the boy who waited on the front step. I think about the man he was becoming before something shifted in him, before the right people got in his ear and told him that his father's sacrifices were really just selfishness in disguise. I think about what I said in the kitchen that day before everything fell apart, that Tanya's family's money wasn't going to buy him a different father. I meant it as anger. I mean it differently now. It means that all of it, the 40 years of work, the ring I sold, the boots I wore through, the crackers and peanut butter, none of it makes a man a good son. That part was always going to have to come from him, and it didn't. I'm 63 years old and I live alone in Hamilton, and some mornings I sit at that kitchen table, the same table, and drink my coffee and look out at my backyard and I think about how quiet it is. There are worse things than quiet. I know that now. I keep coming back to the ring. Not the courtroom, not the camera footage, but the moment I was lying on the kitchen floor looking up at the ceiling. The ring. Diane's ring. The small diamond in the plain gold setting that she wore every single day of our marriage. I sold it when my son was 14 so he could play hockey that winter. I never told him. I thought protecting him from that knowledge was the right thing to do. I thought a good father absorbed the hard parts quietly, so his child never had to feel them. I wonder sometimes whether I got that wrong. Not the sacrifice itself. I would make it again without hesitating. But the silence around it. The way I carried those years without ever letting him see the weight of them. Maybe I thought if he never saw me struggle, he would never have to struggle either. What I didn't account for was what fills the space when a child doesn't understand what things cost. It gets filled with something else, with the assumption that things simply appear, that fathers are resources rather than people. I am not saying that excuses what he did. It doesn't. A grown man who punches his father to the floor has made a choice that belongs entirely to him. But I have had a long time to sit with my part in it, and I think honesty requires me to name it. I kept too much from him for too long. I thought I was being strong. I think I was also being afraid. Afraid that if he saw the real shape of our life, he would feel the absence of his mother more sharply, and I couldn't bear to be the one who caused that. What I know now, sitting at this kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday morning, is that the qualities that actually protect a person, the ones that carry you through the hard years without breaking, are not inherited, and they are not given. They are built, slowly, through being shown, not shielded, through watching someone you love do the right thing even when it costs them something real. Through learning early that the world does not adjust itself to what you feel you deserve. My son was never taught that last part. I thought I was teaching him by providing. I wasn't. I was teaching him that provision was automatic, that effort was invisible, that a father's 40 years of double shifts in the cold was just the background noise of a comfortable life. The courage to do what is right when it is genuinely difficult. That is something I had to demonstrate, and I didn't demonstrate it clearly enough. The wisdom to understand consequences before they arrive. That takes practice, and practice requires being allowed to fail at small things before the stakes get high. The basic decency to treat the people who love you as people, that has to be modeled, consistently. Over years, I thought I was modeling it. I think I modeled endurance without ever naming what I was enduring or why. Frances told me once, a few weeks after the trial, that she thought I was being too hard on myself. She said some people just make choices and those choices are their own. She's right. She's also my neighbor and she is kind, and kindness sometimes softens what is true. What is true is that my son is somewhere in this city tonight, and I don't know if he thinks about the ring. I don't know if he ever will. I think about it every time I sit at this table, and I think about what I would do differently. Not to change the outcome, but to have been more honest earlier about what love actually looks like when it has to work hard to survive.